Wake up and deliver.
Intro.
Good morning to wake up and deliver. Good morning, deliver. I did that already this morning to wake up and deliver. As always, we're here every Monday morning, 7 a.m. with John and myself. And Fraser just let us know he's going to be here in a second. His LinkedIn is acting up a bit, so that's great. Our co-host today is joining. But as always, we're going to start off with some brain food. And this morning, my choice of brain food is, or coffee, whatever you want to call it, give people what they want in a way they're not expecting it.
Oh,
That was pretty good.
I like that one. I talk about like the customer experience, surprise and delight all the time. So I agree 100%.
Yeah, right. Like you don't just you gotta be different in the way about you go about it, right? Like you can't just do it the same way as everybody else is.
Well, right. Like everybody, everyone sits around and starting to talk more and more about the kind of social commerce and the attention economy. But then on the other side, it's like everyone in logistics is like, yeah, but we just keep doing everything the same way. And we'll call it innovation if we can do it either a little bit faster or with a little bit more tech or a little bit more communication. Like it's funny because I think it's pretty safe to say that most people, if you looked at like an apparel brand or if you looked at like a manufacturer, I don't know how much you would say it's innovation just to have like what's tantamount to like a line extension, like the same t-shirt with the next print, or that same flavor of ice cream, just like, or that same ice cream with the next flavor. Innovation that way becomes very, very dodgy. So I don't know. I agree. Like doing things in a way that people are not expecting it. I love it.
Welcome, Fraser, to the show this morning. Give us a brief introduction, and we'll jump right into our great conversation this morning.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, guys. Sorry, I was having a little bit of trouble there with the event. I'm Fraser. I'm the managing partner over here at Linked, and we offer end-to-end supply chain management for consumer packaged goods and food and beverage brands mostly.
Well, so can you, sorry, I looked at your site though, like get more into it. What is it exactly that you guys are doing? You're spending more time on like sort of the transportation logistics side. You're doing more sort of broad base, like full solution, like go ahead, like let the people know.
Yeah, for sure. So it's our kind of theory is basically inch wide, mile deep. What I mean by that is we carved out a very specific niche in the market, which again is specific to consumer packaged food and beverage brands, but it really starts everything from factory sourcing, raw material sourcing, packaging sourcing, international domestic transportation, network analysis for warehouse placement, as well as co-packer placement. So we say end to end, it really is end to end. It's again starts from production all the way down to the front doorstep.
Wow. And then so everyone hears that, and then they're going to realize that we had this conversation today because here I am then like going at you on one of your posts about ice cream, and then the Matt's laughing at me, and then I'm like realizing like, oh, okay, maybe we were talking about different things. So we're gonna have an interesting conversation. As obviously Fraser and the guys are very yeah, exactly. Well, everyone's very well informed, so this should be fun.
Yeah, for sure. It's an interesting topic, and I originally posed the question because quite frankly, from my standpoint, at least again in the US, and we get more in depth in it, but a lot of brands do, or most I should say, move ice cream at -20 Fahrenheit, not Celsius.
Oh, he jumped right onto it. Actually, maybe just restate that question, because for anyone who didn't, like, what was the actual question, just for people who hadn't seen it or whatever.
Basically, why? Most of the times when we see it, it is at, again, -20 Fahrenheit. But in reality, again, to your point, actually, in terms of the documentation that's out there, it's not really necessary. And the reason I asked is because basically you have all of this fodder that's like, hey, it has to be at -20, but no one can really tell you why. And it actually shrinks the carrier pool significantly, first and foremost. So lots of trailers obviously don't go down to -20, most go down to -10 or 0. And then on the flip side of that, if you're shipping smaller quantities, most, if not all, refrigerated LTL carriers also do not get down to -20. It's just -10.
Yeah.
And so I posed that question because I was like, hey, like, why can someone at a company or food safety or a compliance person tell me why it has to be a -20. And I really haven't heard like hey, here's the scientific reason why. It's most just like, this is in our QFS standard and this is why we do it.
Yeah. Okay. No, but wait. But wait, yeah. Before you jump in, let me add why I was being such like where I got so confused. And then Matt's gonna come in and he's gonna like peel back the curtain because he was so happy. It's like, I think I figured it out. I think I know what happened. So from my side, so I spent 13 years in the food industry, and the back half of my career got into all of our ice cream and stuff like that. So I had, whether it was owner operators that were working within the network or even employees with my own trucks, we were delivering ice cream in different parts of Canada. So for me, when I first saw your post, because the Celsius and the Fahrenheit weren't like indicated, right? Whatever, it was just like -20 and -10, like I think in the original post.
No, it has a degree sign, just for clarification.
Degrees, yeah, like degrees, which
I would also too. I would mention as well, John. I'm American. We're very arrogant. We also think everyone's just on Fahrenheit.
Yeah, well, you know what? I guess I'm like, no, but it's funny because I'm like then the arrogant Canadian, because as soon as I read that, I'm like, well, it's clearly Celsius, like, you know what I mean? So, but so for me, everything that we did, no matter where it was, like, and I'm talking like right on the manufacturing floor, and right with all of these food safety standards, at least, the way that, HACCP and all of these different things that Canada is using, or that we used up here, and they're not necessarily Canadian programs, but that we were using, it was like -20 degrees Celsius. Like that's what you shipped at. Like that was the expectation. That's what's in the books. When you actually, to your point, when you start looking it up and you're looking at standards from the EU, when you're looking at standards in different places, it really does start to get into this like, just beyond -18 degrees Celsius range, and it gets into the -20. And then, my whole point, I'm like beating the drum, and I'm like, I don't understand what's hard to, it's like, look, the colder you go, the safer it is. And because you have to go -18 is the minimum, like -20 is just kind of like a comfortable little buffer. And it's an easier way to make people remember. So I'm like going back and forth and finding all of this stuff. And then Matt texts me and he goes, pretty sure he's talking about Fahrenheit. And then you came back and mentioned something about Fahrenheit. And I'm like, well, that's BS. I've never had to ship ice cream at -30, which is the equivalent of -20 Fahrenheit.
Well,
yeah.
Let me jump in. I was going to just jump in. Let me clarify. John was quite adamant that little degree sign was a C. He was arguing with me. He's like, no, it's Celsius. You wrote Celsius. I'm like, listen, John, look at the goddamn post. It's degrees. And him being from the US, it's Fahrenheit. And then he looked at it and said, mother.
Yeah, it was probably a little bit more colorful than that, but thank you for making me seem like I have some degree of self-control.
Yeah, I mean, look, to me, it is strange. I mean, we have 3 larger ice cream shippers, all of which insist on shipping at -20. And it's what I've seen in the past, and again, -20 Fahrenheit, and it is what I've seen in the past as well. And again, I'm not sure if that's how it's mostly in Canada. I'd also be curious to see how other folks are seeing it that also ship ice cream. But yeah, it was interesting to me because obviously texture cited, microbial activity is cited, but again, on the Fahrenheit side, to me at least, there's not much of a difference between -20 and -10. And frankly, I even argue that most of the time, when shippers are doing that, they're insisting on -20 Fahrenheit continuous. I just don't think most reefer operators are running their reefers that hard.
Yeah, so
never mind being able to get down there.
Exactly. So that's a good thing. So how about Matt? Why don't you peel back the kimono, as Alex Hormozi likes to say? You can let us know why you think this happened, which is kind of interesting and reasonable. And then we should talk about actually like how hard it is to keep something at -30. -20 is bad enough, honestly, Celsius. -30 or, those sort of that translation into Fahrenheit. We should talk about that and let people really know why, because I think that's important too, like Fraser, is to be like, well, just why is that so hard? Like, you know what I mean? And what it does. So
yeah, and for context, obviously -20 Fahrenheit is -28 Celsius. And that's a deep freeze. So I did a little research when this was going on. I was hoping I could laugh, and I had to figure out. I had to bug in my mind. I was like, why the hell is just this big difference? And I probably did a good couple hours of research into it, because like you, Fraser, I've always been told -20 was the standard. And I didn't really question was Fahrenheit or Celsius. Celsius depends where you're obviously shipping from, and John was quite adamant that he's never heard of anybody shipping at that cold of a temperature. Doesn't make sense. Standards, this and that. For ice cream, yes, yeah. Specifically for ice cream. So I started digging. So I found this article, and it all related back to this International Ice Cream Association, which was a thing that was funded in the 1900s. And this thing was funded in the 1900s in like Geneva, Switzerland. I'm thinking I have to do something with Nestle or whatever. And they set the standards at the time, but they didn't specify which degree, because obviously in Europe at the time it was Celsius, so they didn't have to specify.
Most of the world has come around, but anyways, yeah.
Yes. And so that then was bought out or got transformed into the International Dairy Food Association, which is the standard that everybody uses now within ice cream. And I think that when it was bought, and it's now in the USA, they just saw the degree and they went, oh, they obviously mean Fahrenheit because that's what we use for temperature. And they didn't obviously mean Celsius because that wouldn't,
who uses that? Like, yeah.
Who uses that? And they transferred the data, and obviously all the writing about it, because when they wrote about it in the papers, it's like the microbes and this and that and everything has to be at -20 degrees. Didn't specify the temperature, and so it was transferred over to this American association that set the standard. They just put the F after it because everybody's like, oh, what is it, Fahrenheit or Celsius? Like, obviously they're talking about Fahrenheit. So that was the reason that I found it made the most sense, because everybody kind of, what I read, everybody said the same thing. It's like, hey, at -20, all the microbes die after 0 Fahrenheit. I believe, John, you can correct me on that one. And after that, it really doesn't make a huge of a difference. And it really doesn't make sense to be at -20 or -10 is perfectly fine for Fahrenheit for ice cream, because there's no big difference between the two. So after that fair bit of research, I think I figured it out, and then everybody kind of just used that standard as the point to, and said, hey, we have to be at -20 because that's what the research says, but I don't think the research actually says.
So to wrap it up, basically, you think it's a typo or a misunderstanding.
I think it's a cultural difference between understanding the simplest way of looking at it, right? Like somebody looks like, oh, this is obvious, right? And there's a lot of those in history, right? So, yeah, I think that's the best explanation I could have came up with. There's no real standard out there that would point why you should be at that goal.
Yeah, I
mean, it makes sense. I mean, it's the only plausible thing. I'm like banging my head over here because it's like, I guess the same reason why we're on the radio show right now. It's like there's clearly a misunderstanding on the unit of measure side, and I wouldn't be surprised if that really is actually the reason why it kind of came to be.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I
looked at the Ice Cream Association. I looked at all these different associations, and they all seem to be pointing back to this original International Ice Cream Association, and that's what they had. And I was like, this is funny how everybody kind of one person set the standard and everybody just kind of followed with it. Now we have an impact in logistics where, to your point, Rich, it's like it's really hard to have carriers running at that temperature at all times, and the longevity of that equipment. Because I had a lot of carriers that would refuse to do ice cream, high claim rate, because the reefer can't hold that -20, and the claim rate would be from, well, your reefer went from -20 to -10 Fahrenheit. Therefore, we're claiming you, but there's nothing wrong with the ice cream. Like, it's perfectly good still.
Well, so a couple of things. So I think to help clear it up is that there's a lot written about like the food safety when it gets towards like past -18 Celsius, right? In talking about like at that point it's considered like completely frozen and essentially like the safest that it can be, just because of the fact that like you pretty much stop like microbial growth and all of these things, right? So it's kind of like the colder the better, right? Same kind of reason why pharma sometimes has to go like ultra cold and stuff like that to preserve everything. But at the food level, like that's considered like dead frozen essentially at that temperature, which is why if you think about it at home, most of your fridges will be default settings around minus 18C or whatever that happens to be in Fahrenheit.
0 Fahrenheit. 0.
Right. So, you know, that's kind of why like the default setting is usually there for most home appliances and stuff like that. So there's a lot around there. So I do think there's something really interesting about the fact about where it came from and how it got translated over. Because like, yeah, never. And I mean, imagine like, you know, I was working for myself. Anyway, my experience was that in a business that was a food manufacturing business, like had our own plants, had our own people, had our own quality, like billions and billions of dollars a year are being made, and you know, all kinds of regulatory guidelines and inspections and all kinds of stuff, and this like never came up. And in terms of the minus 30 or minus 20, well, minus 30 Celsius, minus 20 Fahrenheit, it's not, I mean, it's not so much like just the reefer. Like the reefer itself in the right kind of condition could hold like the right temperature. It's kind of like the challenge of saying, well, also the way then we ship it with box trucks and what you need to do to actually insulate these things and to kind of limit your airflow or to have just the right kind of airflow is really where the bigger challenge comes to more than anything else. And then that's why a lot of carriers don't want to touch it, because I mean, you know, roll up doors or barn doors, like you don't necessarily have the best seals. Like you have to have this really, really amazing airflow all around the pallets, like sort of above, sides, underneath, to make sure that everything is staying super cool. Probably air curtains. A lot of the fleet that I used to manage, we actually had 2 reefers on it in Atlantic Canada, where it was really interesting, which I thought was a great solution actually to kind of increase the potential quality of shipping frozen food, was to have the 2 reefers on there. But that's a lot of the issues, because I mean, like Fraser, what are you seeing from most people? And I'm actually curious, like who, maybe without naming names, since we're not trying to do plugs and stuff, but like, how are you finding the attitude, or what's the difference between the people that are like, yeah, I've got no problem with the minus 30. Like, why do they get into it versus so many people who are like, yeah, no.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess again that was kind of the impetus for it, is like there is no real citation. It's just like, hey, this is our QFS standard, and I think that the QFS standard is, and like quality and food safety for those that don't know the acronym, is it's basically like, yeah, like, you know, I don't know, this is just how we do it. And it's like, okay, I'm not going to argue with that because you're telling me this temperature needs to move at, but out of my own curiosity, like why? And I really haven't gotten a clear answer as to why that is the case. And I would even go a step further, and you kind of mentioned it on the freezer level. Like, I'd even argue that if you're going to have it on retail shelves, then in someone's home, those freezers are not -20, or most likely not even -10, again, Fahrenheit, most likely 0. And so I'd argue actually that that's a pretty big temperature swing, just for the sake of transportation. And so that was the other part of it too. I was like, that doesn't really make sense, because yes, you're going colder. It's not like it's melting, then you're refreezing it, but that's a significant temperature swing. And wouldn't you want to at least maintain static temperature across the supply chain? I mean, I look at it like wine, right? Like wine doesn't go bad if it necessarily gets too warm. It goes bad when there's massive temperature swings. Yes, it can go bad when it gets too warm, right? But you know, if we're talking about between, you know, 50 and 70 degrees, like that's more often not where the cork starts to expand, seals get broken. Like same thing with ice cream. If it's getting significantly colder and then being stored again at a frozen temperature, but not as cold, I'd argue that's actually worse. And so to kind of bring it back to center, yeah, I really haven't heard of any really good reason as to why someone is shipping at -20 Fahrenheit or -30 Celsius. It's kind of just like, hey, here's what we do. Can you do it? and what's the rate and what's the transit time?
Exactly, right. And
Remind me, John, one thing. Remind me, when it's in the warehouse, what temperature does the ice cream need to be at?
that's the thing. We would keep our warehouse at -20. So like everything would stay
minus 20 Celsius. Right?
Celsius. So always Celsius for me, but yeah, -20, -30. So Celsius or Fahrenheit. We would always keep it that way. And I mean, honestly, like it was wild. Like I remember we had an ice cream cooler in BC. And I walked into that thing, and I spent a lot of time in the fresh, like the refrigerated, and like a refrigerated cooler is got like a dampness to it, right? Like, you know, when you're at like 3 degrees Celsius or whatever, it's got like a dampness to it. and you go into the ice cream coolers at like this dead -20, -25 or whatever. Like it might be pushed a little bit depending on the product or whatever, but like or the overall environment. But it is just this like it's just like this dry dead cold. It's really
Yeah.
it's a very different feeling.
And for instance, in the US, what's the standard for the warehousing of ice cream?
Again, the same thing. That's what's so bizarre to me is that -20 Celsius, -10 Fahrenheit. But for whatever reason, again, when you go into transportation, for whatever reason, it was just this -20 Fahrenheit sticking point. And again, like I excuse my language, it was so ass backwards to me. I was just like, that doesn't make sense. Like I don't understand why that has to happen. And it was just my own curiosity. That's why I kind of posed the question. I've spoken to ice cream shippers before. I've tried to speak to more and more food quality safety people about this, but like I just can't get a good reason around it. And I don't know. I think a lot of other people deal with it. I don't know. Maybe this is my hill that I die on eventually, but like it's one of the things where I just think a lot of people are really procuring freight, frankly, that they don't need to. It's more expensive. You have less of a carrier pool. And I don't know. It seems like it's one of those things where people are overpaying for something that's basically just a misconception.
Well, the funny thing is though, and Matt, maybe you can like, you're sort of like the stuff that you're dealing with these days or in the past. I mean, the other flip side is, I'm curious if it somehow emerged through different carriers as well. You know what I mean? There's one, the documentation, but I'm wondering if at some point, if you were like the ice cream guy and you were trying to differentiate and whatever, and you started pushing this off, because the reality with frozen transport, so whether ice cream, meat, any other type of kind of like frozen food, especially, right? Because it's so sensitive, but I mean, pretty much anything that has to stay frozen. The funny thing about this stuff is that almost nobody has like maybe the warehouse can be one thing, and you can definitely have doors that are attached to a frozen warehouse, but most of the time, the actual loading of a trailer, the unloading of a trailer, the transitioning it into a store, for example, the back rooms of the store, none of these areas are frozen or temperature controlled, right? Like
Yeah, exactly.
you can take something off a trailer that whether it's at -30 Fahrenheit or whatever, and like you're gonna put it onto the retailer dock. I was going to use a name, but I don't want them to think I'm bashing, because it's not. It's everybody's the same. You put it onto like a grocery store's dock or someone that's selling food, and I swear to God, like if you're in Dallas or even here Toronto in the middle of the summer, Atlanta, it doesn't really matter. You're going to pull it off, and it could be, especially in those back rooms with everything going on, easily 30 degrees Celsius above, which I don't really know what the Fahrenheit is.
Even take it one step further. Go to a convenience store or gas station. They have ice cream in there as well, and they're not unloading it.
Yeah, but
they're unloading it outside.
Yeah, but no one gets too concerned about like the guy after the fact. I always thought it was really hilarious. No, I'm dead serious. I always thought it was hilarious when I was in the food industry, and we had all of these SQF and all of these high food quality standards, right? And like gunning product off the trailer, right? Making sure it was at temp. And then literally these stores would resell it in bulk sometimes to consumers. Well, I mean, consumers, but I mean, they were reselling it in bulk for someone that was a convenience store or whatever, who was doing their own shopping with the small restaurants or whatever. And then like imagine I just am on the phone arguing because they're like, guys, we wanted to refuse the load. It was like, a degree or two off. We should have refused it. This is terrible. We won't accept it next time. And then I'm walking out and it's like 35 degrees Celsius outside, like dying, like your shoes are melting. And like Bob's coming out with a pallet load of product through the parking lot, and he's loading his minivan.
Yeah.
Fucking blowing my mind.
Well, I mean, I'll do even better. I mean, even here in New York, I mean, I walk down the street, there's a local a retailer that gets supplied by a fairly large non-natural distributor, and they deliver ice cream on the reefer truck that I can tell you right now is either mixed temp or dual zone, and certainly not -20, but it's in these like you guys have seen, it's like the rolling carts that are basically big giant coolers.
Mhm.
And they sit on the sidewalk for, I mean, not a long time, right? But they sit on the sidewalk. Um, they're not being pumped with fresh cold air. And so yeah, it's like for whatever reason, and I think part of it is just the insurance aspect of it. I mean, we've probably gone down the rabbit hole on these nuclear verdicts, and that doesn't really pertain to this, but I just think everyone's so gun shy on the insurance aspect of it that they're just like, hey, I just want to be double sure about all this so I can pass the liability off the next guy. If if it rolls downhill, fine. But I think everyone's just so afraid of the insurance aspect of it as well.
Well, for sure. So the liability, liability and getting someone sick is always paramount, right? When anyone's in food, if you're ever working with someone that's like, yeah, it's fine. Like you probably, I'm going to stay away from you because something's going to happen. But on the flip side, ice cream especially is super interesting just because of the fact, and probably with most frozen foods, because usually they're frozen because they have a weird kind of velocity potentially, or they have a long lead time, whatever it could be. But ice cream in general is one of those things where when you actually hit peak season and to be ready for peak season, like it's like, oh my God, it's Christmas. And then it's like, okay, now I'm producing for the summer in ice cream, right? And you build up these long lead times because pretty much no manufacturer has the ability to actually produce at a level that would keep up with demand when it comes to actually peak season. And then the other thing is too, is that once it goes like bad or it melts, it's really not the same like quality. Like you could probably, I know it's gonna sound bad, but like if you just give it to someone, like someone's gonna taste it and be like, it's kind of fine. But if you have all of these different types of ice creams where they've got they've got different things that have been mixed into it, for like whether it's for flavoring, whether it's like actually texture differences, like cake pieces or chocolate or whatever, this thing melts and everything sits at the bottom, then all of a sudden you're not getting the same type of ice cream overall mixes together. And then the other thing is too is that you get really bad crystallization when it starts to drop in temperature, even not thawed, and then really refreezing, and you can taste that. So little word, a little information I share with anyone who's ever like, oh, you worked in the food industry. It's like, if you ever have ice cream that from the second you open it, you can taste ice crystals, it thawed to some degree at some point before you ever opened it.
Yeah. No, definitely. And yeah, just I think I do think there's a necessary economy. We're certainly having it right now, but I do think there's a necessary conversation to be had around it because, like I said, I just think from a procurement perspective on my side, what we see, and I think we try to take that approach with clients and customers, is to say, hey, like let's take a little bit more of a critical look at your supply chain. And to me, like as someone who's mainly cost driven, for customers to say, hey, how can we actually sustainably do this? I think it's a worthwhile conversation. I think that if you're a logistics manager or even a COO or CFO, just to say, hey, this is what we do because someone years ago said this is the QFS standard. I just think it's kind of leave it open ended, and I don't know. I just think from my perspective, if you're an ice cream shipper, it makes sense to look into it more. The other part of it too is that we've had plenty of customers that are ice cream customers that do their own DSD or do their own store replens on their own assets like box trucks. I don't know a box truck in the world that goes down to -20 Fahrenheit. So that's the other aspect of it as well.
Well, unless it was specifically built for it, which takes quite a bit. Like, yeah,
right. It's certainly a unicorn, I think, in our world, and I think that from that perspective, now you're also looking at differences in temperatures from how it gets delivered to your storefronts or like your retail shop versus how it goes to your distributor or your local retail partner.
So that's an interesting thing. And maybe Matt, I know you have something to say, but get into it after, because but I'm curious in the sense of saying, like, share, because like, you're dealing with a lot of different people, obviously, in terms of, carriers and different loads and stuff like that. Like what does it actually take, like to Fraser's point, like trailers and trucks and stuff like that, like to find these guys that would even be willing to do it, knowing that maybe the base equipment doesn't do it, like sort of off the shelf, so to speak. What do they need to do? And then how hard is it to kind of, one, get people that are willing to do it? And then two, how comfortable are you trusting that that's all happening every day?
Was that Fraser or myself?
For you. Yeah, for you.
Me. I mean, it's sorry, I had a little bit of a brain gap there. It's difficult. I mean, like I was saying earlier, the liability piece, which I was going to jump into, is a lot of the insurances won't even insure a lot of carriers. They do have ice cream because of the equipment, and a lot of them don't have brand new equipment to be able to run that deep of a cold, so they have older equipment to help maintain costs. And it becomes more of a challenge to find a carrier that can run consistently with proper equipment that is properly maintained. Becomes a higher procuring piece. And then the fear of running that equipment, because you're off, if you get off on a degree, you get fined, and your insurance and ice cream, 53 footer full of ice cream is hell of a lot more expensive than, you know, a 53 footer full of produce running at fresh. So it's the cost benefit analysis, and you don't get that much more, call it cost per mile, running ice cream than you would running anything else, really. And it isn't that much of a difference enough to take on that risk. And the guys who do it specialize it, and they probably want to perpetuate that class of doing it because they don't want other competition within it. Or if we lowered the standard all of a sudden, they don't want a whole influx of all of a sudden of capacity. But I think in the end, we do want that because we want, you know, the rates are not where they're supposed to be from a carrier perspective. And it should be challenged. I'm surprised that insurance, this is what I was going to say, insurances haven't challenged this at all because of all the claims they have to pay out. Because I would argue that from an insurance perspective is what makes this product not good anymore. It might be a quality thing, maybe, but people are still buying, like, to your point, John, you've bought an ice cream with crystals on it and you still ate it and you didn't, you know, return it. So where's the actual damage to it as long as it doesn't thaw out?
I would offer that that's probably because most people don't actually know that something happened to it at that point is probably a big reason that no one thinks there's a problem.
I'm sure the carrier or the guy at the dock knew. Like most of the time,
the guy at the dock knew, but like, you know, like little Joey who bought his tub of ice cream, he has no idea. That's why there's ice crystals in it.
But it didn't harm him. The quality is a little bit down, but it didn't harm him. He gets sick, right? So it should be refused on that basis, right? And that's why there's that whole fear of negative, you know, do not go below that temperature for ice cream because it's gonna the quality, whatever, it's not safe anymore. I think that needs to be evaluated and pushed out.
Yeah, for sure. And for anyone listening, like what does it actually, like, what are these guys doing? Like, what does it take to deliver something, like even at -20, but beyond? Like what are you talking about from the box truck to Fraser's point about it not being available, like for the most part, and even from a trailer perspective, like what does it actually take from these guys? Because you're right about them maybe wanting to protect their turf, so to speak, because they've made investments, whether it's in equipment or whether it's in like some strong SOPs and accessories. So like maybe just share what it takes to do those deliveries.
For the most part, it's having that reefer to be able to run that low, right? And a lot of guys don't have that deep freeze on their reefer or able to sustain it. Because think about it, you know, in the Canadian terms, it's not the worst as it can be because we get a lot of cold temperatures and cooler temperatures. But if you're picking up ice cream down in Arizona and it's 45 Celsius or call it 120 Fahrenheit, and you got to be running this box at -20, that's a huge swing. That reefer is humming hard. And a lot of them do go out, and that's why, you know, you would need or you need some special equipment to be able to run it. And it makes it far more challenging in those hot environments. And then unfortunately, the temperatures are not getting cooler, even in Toronto, where it's becoming harder and harder on hot days to kind of keep that temperature. So those deep cold temperature like movements becomes hotter. Same thing for meat, like frozen meat's the same way. And you're having a harder time finding carriers that are willing or able to. And meat doesn't have to go to -20, but still, you know, you're running across down to Mexico from Canada with a lot of these frozen meats, and you have a hard time finding carriers to be able to run that with their reefers that can maintain that deep of a cold all the way through.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, Fraser, you probably see this too if you guys are supporting customers and stuff like that. But I mean, the easiest way to kind of drop the temperatures, so to speak, right? Like when you're thinking about a box truck or a trailer, is to start to limit the capacity, right? I'm going to put up bulkheads. I'm using air curtains. Like I'm going to make it so that my cooling zone for the size of the reefer is significantly smaller. But then that becomes an inherent challenge because, you know, to get the best pricing, like when you're talking about from a manufacturer to, you know, another warehouse, and then when you're talking about getting, you know, stuff from maybe a production facility or a holding facility into the network so that then you could do DSD deliveries, you really need to take advantage of like the most economical way to get the most product somewhere, which is typically, you know, 53-foot trailers, right? Or even some other kind of, you know, combination of like a longer combination vehicle with different sort of product mix. But then, you know, you end up like, okay, I have to have my whole trailer, you know, at that temperature, where it becomes extremely hard. because, you know, to your point, the easiest way is to either, you know, just to shrink the size or put it in, you know, a sub packaging, like a type of cooler or whatever. And how, you know, how challenging is it to find like all of these people and to get it running? Like from your side, like what are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, it's super challenging. I mean, it's a big part of the procurement process for us is actually just finding the carriers that are able to do it. And I would also say this too, that even if they are able to do it from a temperature perspective, a lot of them won't take it just because the high claim rate, and so they don't want. I mean, and just so you can visualize it. I mean, I know you guys know this, but if you're a carrier and for whatever reason your reefer breaks down, like let's say it's just it's something like that. It's not like okay, just claim you could dispose of it. Like no, there's soup all over your
Mm-hmm.
trailer floor now. And so now it's a huge pain in the neck. And so that's a big part of it too. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly something where it certainly limits the carrier pool. It certainly makes the price then more expensive because the capacity is limited. And I would also argue again that it's just one of those things where if you're just looking at it from again, here's what my documentation says. So big distributor here in the US, Kihi, their preferred temperature controlled carrier is FFE. If you're a shipper, call up FFE and ask them if they have any minus 20 Fahrenheit trailers. They do not. And so if the preferred carrier of one of the largest distributors in the US, who certainly sells ice cream, does not have that trailer capability, and if someone from FFE is on here and tells me that that's not the case, please let me know. But if that's not the case, then how do we undo that? Right. So I also think it's incumbent upon the distributors to also make those marks as well to say, hey, here's the temperature that we expected at, not just, hey, show us your own QFS standard. I just think it takes more involvement from each of the links in the supply chain, if you will, to kind of come to terms with that as opposed to just basically putting the onus on the supplier for that.
Well, and I think
Now, hold on, before not only that, I think that carrier also is one of the biggest ones with multi-temp. So they're not only running it at not at negative 20, they're running it at multi-temp reefers, if I'm not mistaken either.
Right.
Key would be one of the few people that could probably get away with the fact that they could have compartmentalization on their trailers or on their vehicles because, you know, they're making a bunch of different stops. They're bringing a huge array of products to each individual stop. So for them, it's kind of possible, right? Like even at the way you see, Matt, these days, like Metro with their like direct to consumer delivery vans that they built, they actually compartmentalize them quite a bit. So they have a relatively small pure frozen section in those things. So they're probably able to really push it down. They might be able to get it going, but in all fairness, like between then some guy going on and off the trailer, picking from different zones in the trailer, maybe taking down bulkheads or, you know, whatever type of air curtains they might have on there or other type of containerization inside the trailer to try to keep it that cold. The second they actually start pulling all of that stuff out and, you know, maybe creating a bit of a mixed pallet or hand bombing stuff like from the really frozen stuff onto the other pallets, you're immediately starting to get exposed to it. And then, you know, to your point, Fraser, probably in most cases, especially with them, if they're going to grocery stores, it's one thing, it's dog hype, but if they're doing restaurants and stuff like that, or smaller, you know, the stores, whatever, tailgating to the ground, walking it out, and then pulling it, you know, it's really funny.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like even look at, you know, again, the folks delivering to those warehouses and also how they deliver to those storefronts. I mean, same thing with like a US Foods, right? Who's, you know, delivering to food service. Like I would just venture to argue it's not as clean cut as I think most people think. And I think that's, if there's a conversation to be had, I think that is the conversation. It's basically just take it with a little bit more of a critical eye, understand how your products are actually moving. And then, hey, maybe there's potential to undo that, you know, minus 30 Celsius or minus 20 Fahrenheit requirement. But I think to go all the way back to the beginning, you know, I do think Matt's reasoning probably makes the most sense. That's just a common misunderstanding that's just somewhere in history for food shippers, especially ice cream shippers. And it's just like, all right, use negative 20 and we just kind of set and forget it.
Yeah, I think that's probably highly likely as well. And then I think, you know, the second point is that for the people that for whatever reason have made deeper investments into all of that, they've just decided now, like, well, let's just hold it. Because again, you're right, you don't want to necessarily open up the pool. So either way, well, look, we're about 10 minutes over. So that was a great conversation. Fraser, anything else? Like, totally appreciate you coming on. That was really cool. And I think it's funny how, you know, we can see these different conversations and these things come up in the comments, but then lead to real in-depth conversation. Because the one thing with, you know, I find LinkedIn especially is that sometimes like all the character limits and the different perspectives, people don't really realize all of the different things that, for example, like for the type of work that we all do, come up on a regular basis, right? People just think, oh, it's either just shipping, or, oh, you're just, it's rate shopping, or these types of things. But there's a lot of like real reasons, especially when you're either in the food space or anything that has a pretty high quality requirement.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you guys have seen this too, that, if you're in, I would say specifically transportation and warehousing, more often than not, you're looked at as being expert in not only your field, but other fields too. And I just think that the market's better when more people are educated on it. And I would just hope that, a lot more people are having these conversations with their customers. I don't think it's happening. That's why it's gone on for so long. It's kind of just like, hey, let's oblige the customer. But I think, again, to have these more critical conversations is necessary. And I think if you are going to be an expert in multiple fields, which is tough to just be an expert in one, but if you're going to be an expert in multiple fields, then have those conversations, understand the why behind it, not just, hey, here's how we do things. Because I do think it ultimately betters the market as a whole.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the part of the problem is not to dive too much into it, is the carriers just want to accept it and get the freight move on, right? And they don't challenge it, they don't think about it, they don't critically go, well, why are we running this, and what's the reasoning behind it? Customer sets the standard. We have the bill of lading, it has the temperature, and that's what we do. And we just move that product along the supply chain, where we should be really critically thinking about why are we doing certain things and why aren't they at the correct temperatures? And can we improve it and save costs all around for everybody, including the consumer at the end, because that's what it ultimately will be.
Yeah, no, for sure. All right. Well, look, with that, I think that's a great way to end off and start the week. So it is Canada Day today. So happy Canada Day for Matt and I. If you look at the YouTube video of this later, you'll see that we're both feeling very festive and national. I don't know. We're showing our national pride with our red and flags and all of this good stuff. And patriotic. There we go. I'm like drawing a huge blank.
It's also July 4th this week.
July 4th too, for sure. So Independence Day for all of our American friends down south. So Fraser, wish you a happy ending to the week, because we're starting ours off kind of on a long weekend. We don't get them all the time, obviously, with the way it's changing. So super great to have Canada Day back ended onto a weekend, and hopefully everyone has a really great week and gets a few days in between of all of the celebrations.
Awesome. Happy Canada Day to you guys, and happy July 4th to all the US guys.
Perfect. And then I will have this up later in the week. And obviously, if you have any questions for Fraser, feel free to reach out to him. His information will be on his LinkedIn. We'll have a little bit of a commentary in there as well on the services he provides. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a great week.
Thank you.